Imagine this. You are a warrior. You have just won the greatest battle of your life. Your enemy, the man who killed your brother, burned your village, haunted your nightmares for years, is finally dead, lying at your feet. And now your chief looks at you and says 4 words that will change everything. Eat him. He's yours. You don't hesitate, because in your world, this is not barbaric. This is the highest honor a warrior can receive. This is victory. Now, before you close this video thinking this is some fringe, isolated story from one small tribe in one forgotten corner of the world, let me stop you right there. Because archaeologists have found evidence of cannibalism on every single continent on this planet. Every single one. From the frozen caves of prehistoric Europe to the volcanic islands of the Pacific to the mighty empires of Central America, ancient humans ate each other, and the reasons why will completely change how you see human history. To understand cannibalism, you first have to understand one fundamental belief that ancient humans held across almost every culture on Earth. They believed the human body was not just flesh and bone, it was a container. A container for something invisible, something powerful, something that did not die when the heart stopped beating. They called it different things: the soul, the spirit, the life force, the essence. But the belief was always the same. Whatever made a man great, his strength, his courage, his intelligence, his ferocity in battle, it lived inside his body, and when he died, that power didn't disappear, it just became available. This is the foundation of almost all ancient cannibalism. Not hunger, not madness, not evil, transfer of power. Think about it from their perspective for a moment. You were living 10,000 years ago. There are no schools, no books, no science, no hospitals. What you know about the world, you learned by watching it, and what you watched taught you this: when a lion eats a deer, the lion becomes faster. When a bear eats fish, the bear grows stronger through winter. Nature itself seemed to be telling ancient humans, you are what you eat. So if you eat the greatest warrior your enemy ever produced, what does that make you? This belief was so widespread, so deeply embedded in ancient human psychology, that researchers have given it a name. They call it exo-cannibalism, the eating of enemies. And it appears in archaeological records going back over 800,000 years. 800,000 years. That means this practice is older than language, older than fire as a tool, older than almost everything we consider human civilization. This was not a chapter in human history. This was a foundation. Now let's talk about the civilization that took this belief further than anyone else in human history. The Aztecs. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in Mexico in 1519, they witnessed something that made hardened soldiers weep, vomit, and lose their minds. Tens of thousands of human skulls arranged in towers, temples stained permanently red with blood, and rituals of human sacrifice and cannibalism happening in broad daylight, in front of entire cities, as public ceremony. The Spanish thought they had found hell on earth, but the Aztecs thought they had found God. Here is how the Aztec worldview worked. They believed the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the sun, and without constant repayment of blood, the sun would die, the crops would fail, the rains would stop, the world would end. Every human sacrifice wasn't murder in their minds. It was a transaction. You give us the sun, we give you blood. But what happened after the sacrifice? This is where it gets deeply disturbing. After a captive warrior was sacrificed at the top of the temple, his body was carried down the steps and distributed. The captor, the warrior who had captured him in battle, received the most honored portion. He would take it home, cook it carefully, and eat it in a ritual meal with his family, not in secret. not in shame, in celebration. Historians estimate the Aztecs may have consumed anywhere from 15,000 to 250,000 people per year through these rituals. The range is debated, but even the lowest estimates are staggering. And here's the part that modern historians find most fascinating. The Aztecs had no food shortage. They had rich agricultural land, abundant crops, thriving markets full of food. They weren't eating humans because they were starving. They were eating humans because they genuinely, completely, with full conviction believed that this was what the universe required of them, that civilization itself depended on it, and if they stopped, everything would collapse. Now you might be thinking, surely the people being sacrificed knew what was coming. Surely they tried to escape. Some did. But many, and this is the darkest part, many accepted it. Because in the Aztec worldview, dying as a sacrifice was one of the highest deaths a warrior could achieve. You weren't just dying, you were keeping the world alive. Your death had cosmic significance, and in a world without modern meaning, without science, without certainty, that was enough. Now let's move from the Americas to the other side of the world, to a collection of islands scattered across the Pacific Ocean, where some of the most sophisticated and terrifying forms of ritual cannibalism in human history were practiced. We're talking about Fiji, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, and what happened here was different from the Aztecs. Here, cannibalism wasn't primarily about religion. It was about war. It was about domination. It was about sending a message so horrifying, so psychologically devastating, that your enemy would rather surrender than face you on the battlefield. In ancient Fiji, the practice was so common that the islands became known among early European explorers as the Cannibal Isles. Fijian chiefs didn't just eat enemies, they turned it into performance. After a battle, a victorious chief would hold a feast, and he would invite the families of the defeated warriors to watch, to sit there, in silence, and watch as their fathers, brothers, sons were prepared and consumed. The message was not subtle. Your greatest men are inside me now. You have nothing left. You are nothing. The psychological trauma this created was so complete, so total, that entire tribes surrendered without a single battle, simply because of reputation alone. The Fijian chief Ra Udre Ra is recorded in history as having consumed over 900 people during his lifetime. He kept a stone for every person he ate. The stones are still there today. You can visit them. In New Zealand, the Maori warriors practiced something equally chilling. After defeating an enemy in battle, they would consume parts of fallen warriors, and then they would return to the enemy village, not to attack again, just to stand there and let the village see them, let them understand what had happened, what was inside them now. The Maori had a saying, roughly translated it means, "I have eaten your chief. His mana is mine, your tribe ends here." Mana, their word for spiritual power, authority, prestige. They weren't just eating flesh, they were eating identity. They were erasing a people's entire reason to exist. Papua New Guinea presents perhaps the most complex case of all. Here, cannibalism existed in multiple forms simultaneously. Enemies were eaten for power, but there was also endocannibalism, the eating of your own dead. When a loved one died, their body was consumed by the family, not as violence, as grief, as love, as refusal to let go. The four people of Papua New Guinea practiced this well into the 20th century, and it caused one of the strangest medical epidemics in modern history. A prion disease called kuru spread through consuming infected brain tissue that killed thousands before the practice was stopped. Scientists discovered this in the 1950s, which means documented ritual cannibalism in Papua New Guinea. was happening within living memory, not ancient history. Living memory. Now let's go back even further, before the Aztecs, before the Maori, before civilization as we know it. Let's go back 800,000 years to prehistoric Europe, to a cave in northern Spain called Grandolina. In 1994, archaeologists excavating this cave found something that changed everything we thought we knew about early humans. They found human bones. But these weren't bones that had been buried with care. They were scattered, broken, mixed in with animal bones, and when they examined them closely, they found cut marks, specific, deliberate cut marks, the same marks you find on deer bones, horse bones, bison bones. When ancient humans were removing meat to eat, these were not accidental. These were not the result of animals scavenging the bodies. Someone had deliberately, carefully, skillfully removed the meat from these human bones. And the bones belonged to at least 11 individuals, men, women, and children. But Spain is not alone. In Gough's Cave in England, bones dating back 700 years show evidence of cannibalism so sophisticated it staggers the imagination. Ancient humans weren't just eating each other here. They were turning skulls into cups, carefully shaped, carefully smoothed, used as drinking vessels, whether for ritual, for display, or for something else entirely. We don't know, but the craftsmanship involved means this wasn't desperation. This was intentional. This was cultural. In Croatia, Neanderthal bones were found with the same cut marks, suggesting that even our closest evolutionary relatives practiced cannibalism, which raises a question that genuinely disturbs paleontologists. Did Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors, ever eat Neanderthals? The evidence suggests yes. And did Neanderthals eat Homo sapiens? Also yes. For potentially hundreds of thousands of years, two species of humans competed for the same land, the same food, the same future, and sometimes they ate each other. Now here's something that researchers find deeply fascinating. When they analyze all this prehistoric evidence, they consistently find that cannibalism was not random. There were patterns. Certain bones were always processed the same way. Certain parts of the body were always prioritized. This speaks to something organized, something taught, something passed down through generations. Ancient cannibalism wasn't chaos. It was tradition. So now we have to ask the question that ties all of this together. Why? Why does cannibalism appear in every corner of the world, across hundreds of thousands of years, in cultures that had absolutely no contact with each other? The answer lies in the deepest layers of human psychology. Psychologists and anthropologists have identified several universal human drives that, in the absence of modern understanding, consistently led to cannibalism. The first is the fear of death. Every human culture in history has struggled with one terrifying question: what happens after we die? And one of the most intuitive answers ancient minds reached was this: if the body is consumed, the energy, the spirit, the essence of the person continues. It lives on inside whoever consumed them. Death becomes less final, less terrifying. Cannibalism, in this context, was an ancient solution to an ancient existential crisis. The second drive is the hunger for power. Every human society has hierarchies, leaders and followers, strong and weak. And ancient humans noticed power seemed to be a physical thing. Some men were faster, stronger, braver, more ferocious. If that power lived in the body, consuming the body transferred the power. This is why it was almost always the strongest enemies who were consumed, not the weak, not the sick, the greatest warriors, the most fearsome chiefs, the most respected opponents. In the logic of the ancient world, eating a weak man gained you nothing. Eating the greatest man your enemy had ever produced, that was the ultimate upgrade. The third drive is the most unsettling of all: dominance. Human beings, across all cultures, across all time, have an instinct for total victory, not just winning, erasing. And consuming an enemy is the most complete form of erasure imaginable. You don't just kill him, you take everything he was, his strength, his identity, his future. You unmake him so completely that he becomes part of you. He ceases to exist as himself and begins to exist only as fuel for his destroyer, in the brutal logic of ancient survival. This was the ultimate power move. Now here is the part of this story that most documentaries skip over, because it's uncomfortable, because it forces us to confront something we'd rather not think about. Cannibalism didn't end with ancient civilizations. It didn't stop when the Aztec Empire fell. It didn't stop when European missionaries arrived in the Pacific Islands. It continued, it adapted, and in some corners of the world, it never stopped at all. In 1961, Michael Rockefeller, son of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, disappeared off the coast of Papua New Guinea. His boat capsized. He decided to swim for shore. He was never seen again. For decades, the official story was that he drowned, but in 2014, journalist Carl Hoffman spent years investigating, speaking to local villagers and tribal elders. What he found was deeply disturbing. Multiple witnesses, in separate villages with consistent details, described what had happened to Michael Rockefeller. He had made it to shore, and he had been killed and consumed in a ritual act of revenge by a tribe that had suffered violence from Western outsiders years before. His death, the death of an American millionaire's son, had been a cannibal killing in 1961. In more recent decades, isolated tribes in the Amazon basin and Papua New Guinea have been documented by anthropologists still practicing ritual cannibalism, not historical ritual, not symbolic ritual, actual practice, away from cameras, away from governments, away from the modern world's judgment. And researchers who have spent time with these communities report something that challenges every assumption we carry. These are not savage people. They are not primitive. They are complex, intelligent, deeply spiritual human beings who simply never received the memo that the rest of the world decided this was wrong. To them, the practice carries the same sacred weight it always did, the same meaning, the same purpose, the same logic, a logic that, if you're honest with yourself, you can almost follow. So here is where we end. 800,000 years of evidence. Every continent, every era, every type of human civilization, and one consistent thread running through all of it. Ancient humans were not monsters. They were not simply evil. They were people, desperately trying to make sense of a world that offered them no answers, trying to conquer death, trying to accumulate power, trying to protect their people, trying to honor their gods, trying to keep the sun in the sky. And they found one answer across cultures, across millennia, across the entire span of human existence that seemed to work. We look back at them with horror, but if you had been born 10,000 years ago, with no science, no philosophy, no religion as we know it, and someone showed you that eating a great man made you greater,